Dan Perry here with another C++ tutorial for Dan on Tech. In this video we will look at the if-else-if structure. In the last video we looked at the if-else structure, so we had a command structure sequence, and if we asked a question and if the results of that question was true, it executed the true code block, but if it was false, it skipped down and executed the else code block. So what I've done is I have taken what we did last time and modified it a little bit, and I've changed x, starting x at greater than or equal to 100, and I've changed the prompt to really big, and then otherwise smaller. Well, I'm going to add in now a code block, and this is my else if block, and what I do, or what we do, is after the if, you add the words else if, and then you put an inequality, in our case, x in parentheses, x greater than or equal to 75, and then I start a code block, and open and close curly brackets, and put whatever code I want in there. For our examples, we're keeping it simple to a single line of code, so in this case it's a cout that says big. Well, if we run this one, and we've got x with a starting value of 75, it comes up and it says big. Well, what it did was it came down through my code. It checked to see if x was greater than or equal to 100, and that was false. So it skipped that block and came down and did the else if. And in the else if, it said if x is greater than or equal to 75. Well, it is 75, so that's true. So it executed the code in that block. Then, once it left it, it goes down and picks up after the final else. Now, this final else is optional. You don't have to have it if you don't need to do something. If all the if conditions fail, you don't have to have the final else. Well, let's change our value, and let's change it from 75 to 175. And with the 175, it says really big. Now that's what we would hopefully expect. With the 175, it comes down, gets to that if statement, says if x is greater than or equal to 100, that is true in this case, so it executes this code block where it says really big, gets to the end of the code block, and it comes down to the end of the else. So it finishes up this entire structure. And once again, most of the time there's going to be more than one command. There could be hundreds or thousands of commands inside that true part of the statement. Well, we can, let's also run it. Let's run it with, say, 25. So it's got a smaller number. And this time it should execute that final else, the smaller one, because it will fail or give us a false on the first two. And it does say smaller. So what it did was it came through, checked this first if, that was false, so it skips down to the next structure, this else if, checks there, that again is false, so what's left is this final else, so it jumps down there, goes into that code block and executes the else code. Right. So we can see now we've got a program with an if and an else if that works fine. The nice thing about the else if structure is I can extend or expand it. So I'm going to paste that code block in again, but this time I'm going to change and say x greater than or equal to 50. Oh, no, well, let's make it 25. 25. And change that big to not so big. Now, when and I had already typed big, so let's get rid of that. Let's not delete too much. And when I run it now, I see an error already there. Maybe not. Not so big. Okay. In this case, X was 25, so it gave us a false on the 100, skips down, tests this next code block, the 75, gives us a false there, skips down and tests the 25, and X is greater than or equal to 25, so it says not so big. Well, that's what we would expect with the value of 25. Let's go up and change that to 75. And run it. This time we would think it will do the big, and yes it does. It comes up and says big. And if we walk through it again, X is 75. It tests the first if, that's false, so it skips down to the second if. That is true, so it executes the code block for it, then jumps down and ends the structure. If I run it, let's run it. I'm not going to run it with 150. We know that will get that first code block, but let's say I run it with a 5. When I run it with a 5, what should happen, and it does, is it says smaller. So when I ran it with the 5, it came down, just like before, tested the first code block, that was false. Skip down, tested the second if, that's false. Skips down, tests the third if, and that one's false. So now it skips to this final else, and it says smaller. Okay, I hope now you see how those commands are working, but let me show you one little problem or caveat you can have with it. Let's say that this 25 I change and make it 85. I'll leave it not so big. We know that the message, we'll see what message. I'm going to run it, well, let's run it with the 5 since I've got it, and I shouldn't see any difference in what I saw before. It says smaller, because just like before, it tests this if statement, checks for false, 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 and does the final else. So that worked okay. We'll check it at 150 just to make sure, or 155 in this, and it does the really big. Well, once again, as we would expect, comes down in, the first one's true, so it does the really big, then it skips down to the end of the structure. Well, let's run it with another value. See, things still seem to be working right. Let's run it with 80. So let me change that to 80. And it says big. Well, once again, it gave us the results we would have thought. It came down here and it checked this, and that was false. It's not greater than 100. It checked the second one, and it says greater than or equal to 75. That's true. So it executes the code block for big, then skips down to the end of the structure. Well, let's try one other value, because it seems to be working okay. Let's try 86. And when we try 86, uh-oh, it said big. What happened? Well, here's where you've got to be very careful when you're using if-else ifs. We came down and X is 86, so the first one is false. So it skips down to the 75, the greater than or equal to 75, and that's true because 86 is bigger than 75. So it executes that 75 code block. Well, when it finishes that, remember, it exits the structure, so it will never see this if statement if the value is greater than 85. So you've got to be very careful with your logic. Make sure that the order in which you put your if and else ifs is such that every else if can be executed. In this case, because of the order that I have it, that if x greater than or equal to 85 can never be executed. So be very aware that that's an error or a problem that can occur. That's a logic error, not a syntax error, so the compiler will not find that error. Well, thank you for watching this Dan on Tech video. Please subscribe to this playlist so you don't miss future videos. Please check out and subscribe to our other Dan on Tech channel playlists.